In this session, we are going to discuss the feminist perspective on state. Now, in our earlier sessions, we have examined the liberal and the Marxist perspectives. The feminist perspective is a kind of understanding of state which developed in 20th century. It's actually originated in the 1960s, and since then it has become a very important, in fact, one of the most dominant perspectives so far as the understanding of state is concerned. Now, all of us are aware of the term feminism. Now, what exactly is meant by the feminist perspective, that is the feminist understanding of, or feminist perception of, or feminist attitude towards the state? To have an understanding of what exactly the feminist perspective means, one has to briefly explain and thereby understand that why the feminist perspective became so important. To understand the roots of why and how the feminist perspective became important, one has to look at two factors. The first factor is that the feminists, they primarily believe, despite differences among them, that the state is a patriarchal institution. That is, the state is an institution dominated by men. It is a male-oriented, male-dominated institution. And therefore, this predominantly male-dominated institution, a kind of institution which has been interpreted, which has been viewed by the males from their angle, well, this understanding requires a revision. The second factor is that all of you know that because of various historical, political, social, cultural reasons, women's movement, well, it emerged in a very big way in the 60s and the 70s. Primarily, it started in the post-war period when women became, or when women began to be aware of the importance, the autonomy, insofar as their rights, their demands, their freedoms are concerned. That is, women's movement for the first time made it very clear, and it was put on the agenda of society, that women have to be treated as an autonomous subject. That is, women will have to be understood, they have to be viewed, they have to be perceived, not with reference to men, but with reference to their own identity. So these are the two major factors which contributed to the importance of, to the appreciation of a new kind of understanding of state which will be viewed by women. That is how women, they perceive the state, how they understand the state. To have a proper understanding of the feminist perspective, again, we have to be very clear about one thing. The point I have already very briefly mentioned, that is, among the feminists, well, there is as such no consensus. There is as such no unanimity regarding the understanding of state. Because among the theorists, among the philosophers, among the social scientists who primarily have discussed this question, have primarily examined or treated this particular issue, well, among them there are sharp differences. And basically, the differences come down to, say, two issues. Or rather, one can put it like this, that is, among the feminists, there are two different ways of looking at the state. There are two major perspectives underlying the viewing of the state, underlying the understanding of the state. Now, what are these two major perspectives among the feminists? One perspective tries to suggest or tries to argue that women have to make an entry in the state apparatus. Women can make use of the state. Women have to participate in the activities and life of the state. This is one understanding. And one can characterize it as the pro-state attitude. There is another kind of attitude, there is another kind of perspective shared by many feminists, which argues that no, state is something which has to be rejected. At least the way the state is experienced by women, well, that has to be rejected, that has to be discarded, and that has to be replaced by a new understanding. So broadly speaking, these are the two different ways of looking at state so far as feminists are concerned. One is pro-state, the other is anti-state. Now let us first of all look at those feminists who try to understand the state from a pro-state viewpoint. This is an understanding, for instance, which is associated with major feminist thinkers, Betty Friedan, whose work Feminine Mystic, well, is a major landmark so far as this pro-state understanding is concerned. Betty Friedan and her followers, as well as a number of leading feminist theories, who broadly come under the heading liberal feminists, their understanding of state is, their attitude towards state is rather positive. Positive in the sense that they accept the fact, they understand it, they share this understanding that yes, state has been traditionally a patriarchal institution. It has been an institution which has been monopolized, which has been controlled, which has been dominated by the males. This is something which they accept. But they simultaneously argue that we have to demand our active participation in the life and activities of the state. And so that through our more and more engagement with the state, through our more and more active participation in the state, it will be possible for us, at least this is what they believe in, it will be possible for us to control, to influence the policies of the state towards women. And thereby, it will be possible for us to realize our rights, to realize our freedoms, to realize our demands. So this is, broadly speaking, the liberal feminist understanding, which takes a positive view of the state. That is, the sum and substance of this understanding is they want more and more participation in the state, active entry in the state. But as I have already mentioned, opposed to this school or opposed to this understanding, there is another perspective which stands opposed to this understanding, which may be broadly characterized as anti-state understanding. Now this anti-statist position, this again is or it can be viewed from three different viewpoints. One viewpoint that is represented by radical feminists, and one such radical feminist is Kate Millett. Her book Sexual Politics, well, it's again a major breakthrough so far as women's perspective, women's understanding, feminist perspective of state is concerned. Now, what do the radical feminists talk about? The radical feminist understanding of state is something like this. The radical feminists argue that the state is a useless institution. It's a kind of institution which will be of no help to women because it's a kind of institution which has been traditionally dominated by men. And since it has been traditionally dominated by men, the language of the state, the idiom of the state, the discourse of the state, well, this is totally male-dominated, male-oriented. So even if women participate in the state in a very big way, well, the exercise of power, influence, well, these will be controlled by men. And therefore, the present state as it is, it demands a kind of, you can say, overthrow, you can say it demands a major revision. That is, according to the radical feminists, two things are important. Number one, or two things they try to underscore. Number one, in their opinion, so far as their agenda is concerned, the state is of no use, of no help to women, the state as it is, because it is a male-dominated, male-oriented institution. This is number one. Number two, the radical feminists, their primary emphasis is on safeguarding, is on recognition of autonomy of women. Women have to be viewed, women have to be treated as an autonomous subject. So it is this autonomy of women, and this autonomy of women, they argue, it has to be preserved. For them, this is the most sacred, this is the most important element so far as women's identity is concerned. That is, I as a woman, I have to be given absolute freedom so far as my autonomous identity is concerned. That is, I am ultimately the last person to explain, I am the last person to talk about how I should look like. That is, my behavior, my functioning, my work, my destiny, well, it will be controlled by me. So this is, broadly speaking, the notion of radical feminism. As I said, there are three variations of this anti-statist perspective of feminism. The second variation, that is known as Marxist feminism. Marxist feminists, well, their understanding is, well, like the radical feminists, that yes, the present state is of no use to women. But their explanation is quite different. Their explanation is that the modern state, as we experience it in our daily life, this is a state which is dominated not just by men, but the point is, it is an instrument of domination in the hands of the capitalist class. This is a point which we have explained already in our last two lectures, where we discussed the Marxist perspective on state. So the Marxist school of feminism, it tries to highlight the idea that the state is actually oppressive vis-a-vis women, not because of the fact that it is simply dominated by men. It is oppressive because it is an institution which is dominated, which is controlled, which is ruled by the capitalist class. Therefore, unless and until this capitalist class, the rule of capitalism, the domination of capital, well, unless these things can be revised or changed, unless we can put an end to the regime of capital or capitalism, women's emancipation will never be a reality. So this is, broadly speaking, the notion of Marxist feminism. Their attitude is anti-statist, but their explanation is different from the explanation of the radical feminists. The third variety of anti-statist notion of feminism, well, this is represented by what is known as socialist feminists. Now, socialist feminism, it is virtually a kind of combination of radical feminism and Marxist feminism. Socialist feminists, what they try to argue is that the modern state, it is oppressive in regard to women. The modern state is a structure of domination in regard to women. Well, that is for two reasons. Number one, it is a kind of structure which is, of course, dominated by the ruling capitalist class. So, rule of capital, the regime of capitalism, well, that has to be changed. But its domination is so real, its domination vis-a-vis women, well, that is something which just cannot be denied. That is, the modern liberal state, it is bound to repress, it is bound to oppress women, not simply because of the fact that it is ruled by the capitalist class. It oppresses women because it is also, that is simultaneously, it is also an institution which is a patriarchal institution. That is, the modern capitalist state, it is ruled by an oppressive ruling class. At the same time, this ruling class is patriarchal, that is male-dominated ruling class. So, what you come across in this understanding is combination of two things. Number one, the notion of class, which they pick up from Marxists, and the other is the notion of patriarchy, which is the basic element, the most important ingredient of feminist understanding. Now, in recent years, what we have come across is that under the impact of globalization, some very important, interesting developments have taken place in regard to feminism. And here again, very interestingly, feminists are sharply divided. Divided in the sense, and this division again, quite significantly, touches upon this basic division among the feminists in regard to their attitude towards state. That is, whether women, they should take a positive view of the state, whether they should participate in the life of the state, or is it that women should take a negative view of the state. That is, whether feminism should be pro-statist or whether feminism should be anti-statist in regard to the state, in regard to their understanding of state, in regard to their perception of the state. So, under globalization, this issue has again become extremely relevant. And among the feminists, there is a sharp division between two schools. There is one school which argues that women under globalization, in fact, are getting more and more opportunities to participate in the life of the state. And they argue that women should actively participate in the life of the state. Now, why? The explanation is very simple. They argue that under globalization, what has happened is social insecurity, it has increased. And therefore, what has become necessary is that women have to work for family. That is, the bread earner of the family is no longer the male. Women, they are increasingly joining a state's workforce. In various professions, women are now engaged. That is, the entry of women in the life of society, in various spheres of society, well, that is on the increase. And since this is on the increase, that is, since globalization has opened up opportunities for women to be engaged more and more, to be engaged on a very large scale in their activities so far as the state is concerned. That is, this growing, increasing engagement of women with the state, well, that has opened up new opportunities for women to participate in the life of the state. Therefore, women have to take a positive view of state. This is one understanding. And this is, you can sense, you can guess, this is a very positive understanding of the state. But there are also feminists, and this is quite an influential section of feminist theories. Well, that section, or representatives of that school, or representatives of that section, however, contest this understanding. Their argument is that no, globalization has actually created a totally different situation. For them, globalization actually has made the life of women more and more insecure and unstable. Because what they argue is, and that is a very interesting argument which they put forward, they argue that globalization, well, what it has done is, globalization has decentered the state. All of you know that globalization, well, it leads to privatization, it leads to the victory of the market, it leads to justification of the market to the exclusion of the state. That is, the state is to be withdrawn. That is, this withdrawal of state, notion of withdrawal of state, that is an important agenda of globalization. And those feminists who put forward this opposite viewpoint, this different viewpoint, their understanding is that because of decentering of the state, what has happened in the life of women is that women do not know with whom they have to be engaged. Earlier, you could locate the state was visible. So, you could protest against the state, you could rise up against the state, you could put forward your demands and rights before the state. Whether the state will listen to it or not, that is a different issue. But there was the visibility of a central authority, that is the state. But now what has happened is, because of the decentering of the state, because of the withdrawal of the state, it is the private sector, it is the civil society, it is the NGOs, which have, and of course there is a market. So they have actually entered, or they have emerged as new actors. So women have to be engaged on multiple levels, at multiple points, with all these sectors. And this becomes, for women, an extremely difficult or a risky exercise. They do not know, they have their problems, they have their agenda, they feel insecure, but whom to address, with whom to negotiate. So this has made the life of women extremely insecure. And therefore they argue that the present state under globalization, this would be of no use to women. This is the kind of state which has to be dismantled, which has to be questioned, which has to be interrogated. So these then are the varieties so far as the feminist perspective is concerned. By way of conclusion, therefore, we have to understand that the feminist perspective on state, it has made a very major contribution to the understanding of state. It has made a very significant contribution on two counts. First, the feminist perspective has made us aware of the fact that you cannot ignore the autonomous identity of women while you are formulating theories of the state. This is one. The second very major contribution of feminist perspective is this. We have to understand now that women have to be treated, or women have to be viewed as an autonomous category. Women have to be viewed not simply with reference to men. That is, women have their own agenda, women have their own identity. This has to be respected, this has to be honored. That is, by treating women simply as appendage of men, by treating women simply as subordinate to men, this traditional mindset, this requires major revision. And therefore, so far as feminist perspective is concerned, it is very, very important for us when it tries to underscore the idea of this autonomous identity of women. It actually has given women a sense of dignity, a sense of recognition, which was not there in our traditional mainstream understanding of state. In fact, among the feminists, there is a kind of formulation which is quite often made, and there is a substantial justification of this understanding. That is, our mainstream understanding of politics, our mainstream understanding of society, this is actually a sort of male stream understanding of society. Because it has been considered as something normal, it has been considered as something natural for men to consider the state and thereby to consider women as individuals, as subjects who are just appendages to men. And therefore, that women demand recognition, well, that has got to be respected, that has got to be honored. So these two factors explain, I believe you can understand the importance, the crucial significance of the feminist perspective on state. Thank you.